Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining today's podcast. I would like to introduce our guests, Kristin. Kristin is a Chief Innovation Officer at Park My Feet and board member at Velodyne and Comstock. And we also have Ranghan Venkatraman, an award-winning entrepreneur, member of the Forbes Technology Council, and a C-suite advisor with unparalleled knowledge and experience in artificial intelligence, cloud, cybersecurity, and technology-driven business model innovation.
Thank you, Prashant. Welcome, Kristin, to this podcast, and look forward to talking to you more about the concept of business physics. In this particular segment, we're going to talk about energy physics.
I know it's one of my favorite topics, so thank you for having me here.
Thank you, Kristin. So I'll basically, sort of kick it off where, the concept really is to perhaps talk about the multi-decade energy transition that's happening. Specifically, as we all know, humans consume perhaps about 14,000 million tons of energy. Sounds like a really lot each year, and produce about 55 billion tons of CO2. And in doing this, the demand for energy is also going to grow approximately 8% a year. And with this sort of behavior and transition, you're really talking about massive disruption at scale. Max Planck said it best: when you change the way you look at things, the things that you actually look at change. So how do we now change this view? And specifically, maybe from your experience, talk about the actions that the company that you're associated with and or other companies that you play a role in. What are they actually doing?
They're actually doing quite a bit. And, in this, I'll call it like ever since I graduated, I've been in automotive now for the last 30 year plus. So I have seen a lot of change since then, which is a really good thing. It was 30 years ago or 31 years ago now this year that I was co-captain and driver of the solar car team. And we were going to change the world. And when I think about solar technology then and now, and you can buy it, these solar car teams are buying it off of Amazon, like unheard of concept, 31 years ago. So it's showing me, how far that realm has changed. Then what's interesting is I go from the solar car team and the racing to hire into engine division at Ford. So I was all about engines. I did cylinder head component engineering, worked at several engine plants as well. So have seen firsthand about the manufacturing, the development of engines, which of course is a big part of, the carbon that is in the air right now that we are really working hard to take out. So I've actually seen a call to action with a lot of big companies that are working with myself and Park My Fleet, that they have aggressive targets about when they're going to be net zero. And I think that's fantastic. It's leading to so much activity in this space and acceleration in this space. And we can certainly get into that more. Seeing it a lot.
Thank you. So to look at key market shifts that are driving this, first, I see an expanding and disrupted energy system. That's number one. And I'm just going to lay out maybe half a dozen of these ones and then
great idea.
Zero in. So the first one being, sort of expanding disrupted energy system. Maybe the second one should be supply diversification, really looking at competitiveness, changing, sort of the hydrocarbon to the non-hydrocarbon, world. Then I see demand evolution, which is really customer preferences and specifically sectorial convergence that sort of drive shifts in demand. Then technology disruption. This is an area that I'm close to. Digital operational technologies disrupting, both supply and demand side drivers. Then I'm talking about shareholder pressure. That could be employees. It could be, NGOs, the works. Then also value pool shifts, where value pools sort of shifting from extended energy systems to maybe sectorial disruption impacting competitiveness. So the case in point here could be, if you think about Nigeria being one of the largest economies in South Africa, if you look at their consumption, is actually far lesser than, say, the United States or, even the countries like Brazil, India, China, where China even, consumes probably 3/4 of the energy consumed in the Asian markets. And if you see that view, how do you see, for example, some of the trends that could lead to more of what I call sectorial disruption rather than the view of the world being one, and saying everyone needs to lower the consumption. But when you really look at it, you really can't put them in a homogeneous bucket. It's a heterogeneous bucket. So how do you see this transition happening?
Yeah, well, one of the things, so I don't know if I'll give an example of something. And I wanted to just add, I'm all about diversification. So diversification of what materials you use, diversification of energy. So when I'm looking at right now, I am looking at what I call this energy ecosystem. How do I get the greenest energy at the lowest cost? And how can we convert fleets over faster to more sustainable energy sources? Because they can be centrally managed. So it takes the whole equation out of enough public infrastructure or range anxiety. It really does take that out of play. Because when you're centrally managed, you can choose the vehicles that fit those needs perfectly. You can figure out ways if they need to have en route DC fast charging, you can figure it out. But one of the big challenges we have is the grid. So think about our grid in the United States. If I have a site that has 100 Class 8 electric trucks, the chances of getting that energy to that site are slim to none. And how long would that take me to actually get it? So I like to think in a different headset. How do I look at sustainable microgrids? And I actually think that this is a great solution globally. Like, think if you have a disaster, right? How much faster that you can get entire areas or countries back online if you're thinking more nimbly in this way. So having sustainable microgrids, which could be different depending upon the location I have, the state that I'm in. But these microgrids then allow me to control the energy. And I'm all about V to G, V to X. So how do I look at where it makes the most sense to sell back to the grid in peak demand hours, and leverage that opportunity as well. And use software to know exactly the needs of the fleet, the entire fleet every day, looking at the wind, the temperature, the driving behavior, so that I am managing my energy and optimizing it. And of course, when you have microgrids, you need on-site battery storage. So it's a different way of thinking of this whole transportation equation, because I'm not going to rely on the grid, and I don't think that's the right solution.
So in that, can we maybe ask about two basic things? One is probably, at what point will the, transition happen where, specifically, I'm talking about metrics like profitability per joule, or invested capital turnover, or joule delivered per unit of capital. When do you think it's going to actually flip in the direction of making that actually viable for, users, or
That's a good question. Yeah, so it's going to take a little bit of time, but what I've seen right now is, because there are government mandates and companies want to be good citizens, and so they're looking at their whole ESG reporting and their scores. So having that data and the stats and facts on greener energy. So I've seen very large companies really take a new look at their entire transportation ecosystem. So not only routes, optimizing routes and looking at their supply chain and distribution, but how along those routes, like where are they going to need electric versus potentially other low CI or low carbon intensity scoring fuels, such as there's different biofuels, there's different kinds of ethanol. Some have higher CI scores than others, right? Some biodiesels and biogases have higher CI score than others. Same with electricity, right? We talk about, quote, dirty electricity and green electricity. So they are actually very now conscientious about that. And as they get better efficiencies in the system and take out waste, that also helps them with their bottom line reporting. But as you get these companies that might be doing it for, let's say, the better good of their company and the name of the company, then it also does bring a lot more economies of scale in the future and better technology development. And I think we have lots of cases in point in history where that's been the case. Like, for example, on the solar car 31 years ago, we had very efficient solar cells and they cost a fortune, and it was 11%. And look at what you can buy today on Amazon, right? So it's those that, as you get better, same with batteries. There are so many battery companies and new developments when you look at, let's say, solid state, that are getting much higher densities, lower cost, and much better range. And I like different ideas and innovation about how to do, let's say, what I'd call high cycling batteries. So let's say, 99% of all trips are 150 miles or less. That battery pack can be designed a lot more robustly than, let's say, an extender battery pack that's only going to be used like 4 times a year over 150 miles. It's a different game, and it gives you a range, let's say combined of, let's say, 600 miles. But it's a different way of thinking about solutions, and that's what I like.
Can I maybe an out of the box question here is, if you really look at how cloud, has taken over infrastructure as a service, and you have a situation today that most companies don't need data centers. We can pretty much leverage the cloud as the default. What would be that equivalent, if you use cloud as a metaphor here? What would that equivalent be in the energy world? Because if you really look at it, right, you have varying degrees of consumption. As I'm looking at it, I'm basically translating the question into demand dynamics into supply constraints. And maybe I can classify them in 4 questions. So how will demand dynamics impact the price of the energy source? That's number 1. It's a loaded question. And however, I'm trying to see it from, say, maybe 4 different angles. So demand dynamics impacting the price of the energy source. One could be, the second could be the net margin that can be generated from each energy source, because ultimately it needs to translate into ROIC and things like that. And what's probably the impact of this carbon, environmental, social governance stuff in each of these markets, and perhaps how regulations can play a role. The reason I'm saying this is, why is this so hard? I think the question that I'm really trying to
fair enough.
Mental model is, why is this so hard?
Fair enough. And so the energy, that first question, I think it really does depend on, are we able to transition from what I call our traditional antiquated grid system that is, in my opinion, not really robust, not high tech? Are we able to transition that or not? So I'm always an optimist at heart. So I like to think about, yes, that we can change it. And as I said, I wanting to think of, how do we each look at each battery, no matter where it is or what it is. It could be a battery in a car. It could be battery storage, right? From a microgrid system of sustainable energy from either wind farms, solar farms, and whatever it is. So how do you look at each battery as, let's say, an extension of a grid and maybe a new grid network? So the energy question. So what's the equivalent to the cloud? I guess you could really say having that new framework of, I'm kind of thinking of like how you have your brain and all the neural pathways and stuff. It's just a different way of doing it that could be, in a sense, that same cloud level that gives a power. Because as I said, if everything is V2X, and I believe every car manufacturer should be forced to make things V2X to give more flexibility as a system, as we look at energy. So, and as we talked about before about diversification of energy, diversification of the materials that you're using in these batteries, I am all for that, because it just provides more robustness to the entire system. So why is it so hard? I think because we're resistant to change, and you have to sometimes you have to overcome that inertia. There can be huge inertia, right, to overcome, to get over that. And also there is a thing about technology. We think, in my opinion, we think a lot more linearly. And when you have exponential technology, it's really hard for our linear minds to think about these doubling or quadrupling, in the next like 2 to 3 years, on these technologies that have, let's say, 12-month clock speed, and they're flipping. It's hard for us to imagine then what's capable at that time, especially when you have, let's say, a mashup of other exponential technologies that lead to something that didn't exist today.
So, what you're basically saying, in other words, paraphrasing it, would be maybe 3 things. One is, of course, energy is not just a technical problem. It's a human problem as well. Number 2, the rules of the energy space are fundamentally changing, and as a result.
And they should change.
Absolutely. So the math and physics of energy is, going to be very, very different than the math and physics of energy that's lasted for all these years. And then last but not the least, regulations and laws, are complicated because you're dealing with, geopolitical, you're dealing with beyond the geopolitical lines, right? Basically. So you're dealing with the world per se. And even if you look at what the US did under the Trump administration, is to go back on some of the Paris agreements and things of that nature. So you also do not have that consistency. So if I if I were to paraphrase what you said, it's basically around three things. One is sustainability, one is digitization, and then perhaps the third thing could be resilience, right? The ability to sort of come out of it. If you look at the cloud,
and I love that word resilience. I really love that word. I think it's a very important word. And successful people and our big monumental leaps have been with resiliency.
And so if you look at what the cloud did to the technology world, it gave us sustainability, it gave us resiliency, and the most important thing is that it allowed for massive disruption to happen at scale.
Totally new things. Yeah, totally new things that couldn't exist before.
I'm wondering, what are the kinds of maybe companies in this space? They could be speculative startups or, other established companies that are sort of doing that groundbreaking work where they're not solving siloed problems, but solving problems at scale. Do you have
macro problems?
Yeah. What do you think would be
I'll give some thoughts. I don't pretend to be an expert. I'm a mechanical engineer, but I actually have a cousin who just who studied in quantum computing and got his PhD in cybersecurity. So I've, talked a little bit with him, read some of his papers where the terms, go right over my head, but you have to feel the essence of what's happening and being discussed in these papers. And when I look at, quantum computing and the opportunities that come into play with that, I think that's kind of that completely different realm that we're only now touching the surface on. And as I said, I don't pretend to understand it, but I feel like I know enough about it to know that that is going to be significant and a true game changer for a lot of things. A lot of what I call societal issues today that we have, challenges and how to overcome them. I think it's just, I actually find it extremely exciting.
If you think about quantum computing as an example, right? So where do you think it can, play a role in this, in your opinion? Because there's different.
So for example, if you have quantum computing that's specializing in material development, look at about the battery development. Think about accelerating time to market. Normally that time, what I actually just heard at a recent MIT event, I actually didn't know it was this long, that it can take 12 years from their first real proof of concept work before you get it out in mass production kind of thing. And I'm like, that's too long. We have to shorten that cycle. It's too important right now. If we're all dependent upon lithium ion batteries for the next 12 years, that's horrible. We won't have enough. And we need to have ways to recycle it. So just think if you had, a quantum computing expertise in material development that could accelerate the battery, the density, lower the cost, various materials that are not rare earth materials. And as I said, with the diversification, that's where I think we're going to get some transformation happening. So that's just one example that I've thought of. And there's many more, you can carry that on into many different industries as well.
So I think from a quantum standpoint, one opportunity based on what you're mentioning is really, in my opinion, the supply diversification, where you can actually look at varying degrees of sources as one opportunity.
The supply, but also has the opportunity then to lower the cost. Just think of what these costs of the batteries now have gone up globally, right? Huge percentages, doubling practically 50% higher. So that's not sustainable. And it makes it very challenging for manufacturers then to predict even next year what they're able to make and afford and what that's going to cost us as consumers. So using that, and as you say, by getting the diversification, but also choosing purposely much lower cost, much more available materials, is going to lower the cost down. I think it also has an opportunity to increase the densities and improve the range. So it's all those three elements that I think it's going to really address.
Have you, seen digital operational and information technologies playing a role in the supply side and the demand side drivers in your experience? And specifically, are there roles in the digitization of physics-based digital twins, software solutions playing a role in this shift?
Oh, absolutely. As part of kind of the ecosystem, I look at having that whole digitization and digital twin. That's what really is going to help me manage my energy, knowing, as I said, what is the overlaying, you digitize, you have your digital twin of the vehicle, the components, and then you've overlaid your temperature effects, and you can get like 95% plus accuracy of your energy usage on a day-to-day basis based off of, as I said, things that are usually hard to predict. Like, okay, with this temperature, how is that going to affect my range today? Oh, and how is this driver compared to this driver? And it also helps you then teach drivers on how to drive more efficiently with electrified vehicles. The digital twin is going to play a very important role in, I think, just making us as a society more aware, one, of what our implications are for, let's say, our driving styles. And then two, how can we make it more efficient? Because I think that we need to start having a more global headset. How do we get better asset utilization? So it is not very good to have my car sit in my garage 95% of the time unused. So how do we get, like 60% utilized, on-demand, autonomous type electric transportation that can be centrally managed and centrally charged, and make sure that they're up to speed on the highest, and using that digitization, and that can really, I think, optimize then on routes, right? Flexible routes and the whole system effect. So I see lots of potential for that and I think we, as a society, we need to start going in those directions for, more efficient use of our resources, assets, and think differently about how we move both people and goods.
So how do you see, the transition to a net zero? Are you an optimist about, the transition at this particular stage?
So as I said, I am an optimist at heart, but honestly, we need to get more out. I think I just read that we're going to get it, it's going to go 2.4 degrees Celsius is the current trend that we're on. Yeah. We have to move faster. We are not going to be net zero by 2050 as a globe if we don't look at better ways to get the carbon out. If we don't look at our energy, how do we get cleaner electricity? We had discussions at this MIT Mobility Forum a lot about nuclear. I don't know how we're going to get there without nuclear. And I'm talking modern nuclear, right? We have, it's very different from the old stuff that people have this mental image of. So I don't know how we're going to get there without it. And so I think we're going to have some very significant changes of our headsets about what's important, and also not to have fear come into play. I look at that as just instant fear from the past, as opposed to, wow, we have really, advanced this so much, and we need to look at what is best for the world as a whole and get it out.
So if you look at the rough distribution of contributors to global warming, roughly manufacturing is 30%. You're looking at electricity being 26% approximately. Mobility is about 21%. Agriculture and stuff is about 12%, and then the rest. Now, if you're talking about mobility being 21% and talking about electricity being 26%, do you envision something equivalent of an energy company, or that the classic utility companies being able to probably distribute, energy from clean sources? Are you aware of, an energy company that may just, for example, only be creating energy from clean sources at this point?
I would say I am not aware of that. I would love to be connected to someone that is making that their core model. I would love to. And as I said, I'm looking at what is the best choices for microgrids. What does, let's say, a 2 megawatt site look like off grid? What does maybe a 10 megawatt site, but what does a 50 megawatt site look like? And the more we have people kind of collaborate to look at, how do we get it with the lowest CI rating as possible with a footprint of, let's say, 50 megawatts, that would be fantastic, because, collaboration is going to be absolutely key. And as I said, it's going to be thinking differently about it. And there might be several things. There could be the wind and solar, but you're not going to have, in all cases, the room to have, 500 acres of solar plus, right? What if you have only a 10-acre plot of land? How do you do it then? And so, but I would love to. I don't know of anyone that is solely looking at that, though I do know that there's a lot of energy companies that are exploring things. But as I said, we really need to accelerate, get the carbon out faster, and figure out how to do this more in collaboration, because I think that's the only way we're going to get the acceleration to happen.
See, along the lines of what you're mentioning, right? As I was thinking about it, I was thinking about even Elon in his work with Tesla. Why hasn't he, for example, maybe started a company that actually focuses on the sources of energy? Because if you really look at it, right, I mean, he's solving one end of the spectrum where he's really revolutionized auto in a way that it has never happened before, and clearly a disruptive move, a hugely exponential technology that is sort of deployed at scale. And he not only had the right idea, but he got the idea right as well through consistent execution. Now, the question, that I've pondered over is, why hasn't he dabbled perhaps with taking energy as a problem and also solving what I call the supply side of the equation as well? The supply side of the equation in this particular case is the source of energy, not just the one half of the equation. Even if you just keep it simplistic and say it's 50%, each, where you're focused on the source of supply of energy and then the deployed, because the cars are just basically the demand side of the equation.
I know. I wish I knew Elon and would just have a chat with him. You know what? When I think about it, because it has crossed my mind, that same question. Like, I'm surprised, and it's possible that he's doing it and not announcing it, but that's not his style. So, but also, like, when you think about like Bill Gates, very smart people who have a lot of money, I think that we need to have more focus on this. For me, this is a critical global issue. And I wish I knew an answer to that, because, some of the other, what I call dabbling and exploration that's being done seems to be a lot lesser priority to me. Though I admit what he did with Tesla really absolutely rewrote the rules of the game in automotive. I remember clearly I was working at Ford when they launched. Oh my God, everyone in all the OEMs were like, they have no idea what they're doing. They don't know. They don't understand. They're going to fail in a year. He's going to waste all this money. And look what they've done. They really created something.
I actually love it when someone says you're going to fail and you're going to, do all of that, because actually that means that it gives me the time to actually work on those things. Because if you say it's a brilliant idea, you're going to try that idea on your end. See, first of all, having the right idea is the biggest challenge. And if you really think that, the idea doesn't matter, I hate the idea, then it's fantastic. Then you get that much lead time ahead of others. So I love it when innovations are criticized, because the innovator actually has the advantage at that particular point. Maybe not so in the energy world, because in the energy world, I think we need many ideas to sort of come together to make this work, because you are really not in a situation where you have that much amount of time for you to wait till that actually happens. The inevitable happens. See, unlike COVID, like pandemics, you could come back and you can be resilient. The problem with this whole issue with climate change, as we all know, it is irreversible at a certain stage. You have gone past a certain threshold that you really cannot come back. And I'll say, Bill Gates actually has breakthrough innovations, right? As you know,
he does
on, a lot of the investments towards nuclear and other forms of technology. And but I think there is more first principles based reasoning that is needed here. I'll say first principles reasoning, not just from the standpoint of coming together and developing new technologies, but even companies, instead of just reasoning through analogy, need to think about how they would reason with first principles to say, how would I essentially address these issues now with what I have?
Agree. Yeah.
As opposed to,
because we need to do it right now. We do.
I think one opportunity clearly is digitization. If you really look at some advances,
I would agree. Yeah.
With digital twin, you really have that opportunity to showcase what that impact would really look like, and a lot of what if scenarios if there were changes that were sort of adaptable in this space.
Right. It gives you like that window of the future, right? And as you said, the what ifs, it's a really powerful tool.
So that would be, one thought. And in terms of mobility, perhaps maybe a little bit about your company and what you're doing, to advance this particular cause.
Yeah. So, it was actually, I got involved with Park My Fleet on their advisory board, and then quickly was asked to be the managing director of the Charge Across America race. So I'm actually wearing our shirt here. It was a year ago today that we were at our second to last day of the race at the Vegas Speedway. So I was really excited then. So I'm kind of wearing this in honor of it. It was so insightful because by looking firsthand I experienced the Tesla infrastructure. I drove a Tesla Model Y 3,300 miles over 10 days. I observed 5 teams and I challenged them. I didn't make it easy. It wasn't about time. I had strategic decision making, kind of like what we did in the solar car race. But I got to observe firsthand the non-Tesla infrastructure. So those insights that I had of their experiences for pain, for charging, where I had one team had to go to 10 different chargers because they were either completely broken or a 150 kilowatt charger was really only giving them 20. And they're like, their charge time was on the clock. So they were like, okay, I got to go to another one. This is not going to work. So it was just, as I said, so it made me that's why I decided to become Chief Innovation Officer at Park My Fleet, because I do see opportunities for fleets to convert over faster, to be centrally managed. And I know companies are struggling with all these decisions and that entire ecosystem, especially the energy portion of it. Like, they're trying to give roadmaps to the utility companies in key areas and project them over the next 5 to 7 years. And I'm thinking, why are you doing that? Like, think about it differently. So that's why, as I said, I'm coming up with a full ecosystem. So all they have to do is buy the truck, and they have the energy, I store it. I have, as I said, the digital twin that helps them optimize EV routes, as well as I know the energy. We still have fleet managed services. And we have economies of scale with multi-tenant. So it's that efficient asset utilization, as I mentioned. They're all gated and fenced with 24/7 coverage. And we'll even have driver amenities. So if the company wants to have showers for their drivers, because, driver retention is a big deal. You want them to be happy. So it's really handling the whole end to end. And as I said, it's any energy. So if they wanted electricity, or if it was a hydrogen fuel cell and needed hydrogen, or if it was B100, right? Whatever energy they want. And of course, the metrics that help them characterize to the world, like, here's how we move the needle. As I said, the race really showed to me that the fleet opportunity should be prioritized because it can happen faster. So that's basically my goal.
Fantastic. So what is your role specifically? Innovation has different definitions, and everybody, looks at innovation differently. What is your definition of innovation, and what is the purpose of your role?
So the purpose of my role is to connect the dots. So I have, over 30 years in automotive, and I do know a tremendous amount of people. When I worked over 3 years at Ernst & Young, I had to start thinking about each sector. Here it was before I was in OEM world, and I was thinking of, okay, I'm building engines, I'm building cars. Now it was like, wow, what are the implications to the finance sector for moving people and goods? Real estate, healthcare, even paint companies, right? Smart coatings and stuff for autonomous. The smart cities, smarter infrastructure. All of these things play hand in hand. How could distributed ledger technology and smart contracts help with kind of that whole shared economy and mobility e-wallets and asset pool utilization stuff, optimization? So you don't need a back office, right? It really opened my purview of, just kind of how all interconnected it is. So for me, innovation, I like to, meet people and put things together, right? Like, oh, well, what if we use, this? I don't believe in reinventing the wheel either. So it's like, wow, this company I really like, and I want to use them. So it's putting together kind of those puzzle pieces to create something really new and different. So that's kind of how I like to define innovation, because it's creating something new, but also thinking a little bit more maybe outside of the traditional headset that most people think of.
So when do you think this particular segment is going to be, say, in 10 years from now? See, because when you think of what the future could look like and sort of envision that and start working on it today, what would what would sort of be the trends that you're looking at and sort of paying close attention to in terms of where this is headed?
So are you talking the ecosystem of the energy or the ecosystem of fleet conversion for decarbonization?
No, the part that you are playing a role in.
The part that I'm playing a role in, I actually think in 10 years, I believe that all fleets are going to be completely like CI of 0 or even negative.
Got it.
That's my prediction.
And how do you
I'm an optimist, though. I'm an optimist. So,
but how do you think we're going to get there? Given the current, sort of shift in supply constraints and many other factors.
Well, because there's many ways. As I said, it's about the diversification. It's not all electric. I do think there's going to be great strides made in those areas for hydrogen fuel cell for trucking and stuff, for electric. I'm talking class 1 through 8 trucks. There's also, as I said, there's also other fuel sources, right? And there's a lot of companies now looking at negative CI, like biofuels and ethanol and diesel and stuff. So if you look at the whole, and then there's companies that are already creating kits, conversion kits that don't cost a whole lot, that make it a little bit easier. So there's all that different innovation and different ways to slice and dice things that I don't see anything preventing it from happening. I don't. There's nothing to prevent it from happening.
Except? What could come in the way, because if you really look at, when I said except, what I meant is specific countries, because, I was wondering whether you were referring only to
I'm kind of talking the US. So, okay, I was really talking the US because I've traveled a lot over the world, but you're right. If you look at every single country in the world, yeah, I would not say that. I'm really talking about the US.
Because my concern is really on countries like China, India, and even India, I think, is probably progressing. But I would see that, some of the other countries,
greater challenges
are going to be the impediment because, the cost of conversion for a lot of these countries are,
it's unaffordable. Yeah.
Unaffordable.
It's unaffordable. Yeah.
I think that is.
I hear you. Yeah.
And I'll say, this happened, probably a decade or two ago when Vodafone actually had technologies. And when Vodafone had gone to India, the situation that they faced in India was the technologies that they had invented in Europe was just unaffordable in India.
Right. Didn't work at all. Did not work. Same, we had the problem with the cars. Here we're designing these super fancy cars with all this, intricacies and stuff and features and, machine tolerances that it just was irrelevant in India, right? So we had all this cost in the engineering and design. So I hear you. We do that in the States all the time. We don't really understand those different markets and what is good enough and save the cost, because cost is king in those countries. You're right.
So, to extend that thought, right? So when Vodafone had this issue, Vodafone India, for example, innovated on certain technologies because they had to. There was constraints, give you that ability to be creative, right? And then it happened to be reverse innovations getting ported from India back to the UK and other markets because the markets there had no choice but to innovate.
Right.
With cost, being a significant factor in all of this because they didn't have the investment capacity or the velocity to do that. So I'm wondering, maybe if some of these innovations stem from those countries because they start with those constraints, you're
that we're better off. Yeah,
absolutely.
We get a better solution.
If you look at even Tesla's issue with,
I love that idea. Absolutely. It makes complete sense. You're right. And I guess the question I have for you then is, so do you feel that those countries feel the pressure enough to innovate to get there, or are they really not prioritizing that? It has to be a priority for them to want to do that.
I can at least talk for the big economies, right? I can talk for China and I can talk for India. I think both of them feel the pressure. If I talk about China, they wanted Tesla to come in and actually be there, even though they're very supportive of companies that are born within the market. But they felt that Tesla could actually be disruptive and shake the local market enough that it will sort of spur the innovation and competitive spirit. Because when you're a monopoly, you just don't have the incentive, a duopoly or a oligopoly, like what Ford, GM, and Chrysler had in the US. I mean, at the end of the day, it just came down to a market size, which was continuously getting bigger. you were big, fat, and happy, and you really didn't need to do much. But it was Tesla that sort of moved that needle. And so in China, I think they viewed Tesla as that disruptive force and game changer. If you take India for that matter, the biggest issue right now, I think the world order, there's a bright side to the Russian-Ukraine conflict, in my opinion. The bright side is energy costs are going up. So you don't have a choice but to really look for an alternative because of that situation.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So I would love to see those countries come up with great low-cost solutions to these problems. I would love it. And I'd love to talk with them.
Yes. So that's kind of where it is. But thank you so much.
Good point.
And much appreciated. Look forward to connecting with you soon.
Yeah, I've really enjoyed it. And, I have to say, you're like a walking encyclopedia of facts. I love it. It's great. Fun conversation. Really enjoyed it.
More to come. And, we can have other episodes covering, other facets of this now that we've sort of started it. And we can probably, collaborate on that.
Excellent. Would love to.
Thank you so much, Kristin. Much appreciated.
Thanks. All right. Bye.
Thanks.